He sat staring at the sword his lord brother had made for him, checking its edge, observing the taper, the evenness of the fuller, its raven claw quillins, the black stone set in the pommel. Yet something about it seemed strange, off-putting. There was an evil in the steel. It seemed to glow red, like the blood that it drank was crying out from inside of the blade, though it could have just been the reflection of the torchlight. Even so, there was something evil about it. Jordan had returned the previous morning, before dawn. His lord brother was summoned to the stone throne, and Jordan knelt before him, laying out his spoils. "Lord Brandon, I bring to you the helm of the demon who slew our father, as well as its blade. This is the halberd that was used to kill our father, and so many others. I regret to say that I was only able to injure him. I took one of his eyes and part of his hand, but he still lives." The large helm was a lightly rusted iron, with the horns of a ram pinned into its sides. The halberd was a foot-long axe that swept up into another foot-long point, with a 3-yard haft. Jordan looked like a child carrying it. Brandon came down from the throne and instructed his half-brother to rise before embracing him. "Thank you, Jordan." He turned to Teddy Brown. "Teddy, I want this halberd reworked into a sword as soon as possible." Jordan thought it should have been destroyed. It was the blade that had killed Leo the Loser, Hugh Glass, Captain Dwight, and that cut off Hard Al's arm. It was the blade that had tasted the blood of their Lord Father and rent him. Though it was symbolic to an extent, to turn an instrument of evil into the favored weapon of his people. "It shall be finished on the morrow," said Teddy Brown. 20 smiths and craftsmen worked on it for 30 hours straight until it was finished. That afternoon, Brandon called Jordan to the long hall and instructed him to kneel. "Jordan, with this blade, I knight you. You are now Sir Jordan, Knight of Larksvale. You came to me and said you would wield your sword in retribution. I now bestow to you the steel that was used to kill our father, and I name this sword Retribution. Wield it to finish the job." He was a knight now, with a named sword of his own. Something felt so wrong about it. Holding the steel that ended his father's life made him sick. Even so, he was determined to kill this demon. That night, in that dark forest, the fury pulsed through him, and he could feel the rage pumping through his veins. When he knocked the helm off of its head, long curly hair tumbled out of it. Underneath was no monster, but a man with soft eyes. Terrified eyes. Jordan had cut the halberd from his hand, and the way he scrambled to his ram to escape made Jordan angry and sad. This was no monster, but a man who valued his own life. A man who was fully mortal, who was vulnerable, who, with one well-placed slice, would be dead. If only he had thought of how those who he killed valued their own lives. Jordan thought of all in the crypt who had been put there by this man they called a demon. How many lives were ended by that very steel? The next morning, he ate with the bard he had found in that forest that night, Gyro. The bard tried to make conversation, but Jordan didn't say much. He never did. He pushed his potatoes around his plate and took everything he had to eat them. His appetite had left him long ago, but he knew he needed to keep his strength, so he forced himself. Afterwards, he went to the long hall for the council meeting. He had been invited by Brandon, who said that he wanted all of the brothers he had left advising him. Lord Brandon, Eldon, and Teddy Brown were already there by the time Jordan came. Soon after, Josh arrived and did not look happy. He didn't yell, and hadn't since their Lord Father had died. Even so, he was no friendlier than he had ever been. "What is he doing here?" he said, tilting his head at Jordan. "This is the council meeting." Brandon turned sharply and rebuked him. "He is my brother, Joshua. He has just as much a right to be here as you do." That wasn't true at all. Jordan was a bastard, an illegitimate son. He had none of the rights as a true-born son. The reason he deserved to be there wasn't because he was a brother. He didn't deserve anything. He had earned his place. He was there because he had defeated the unbeatable demon by the trade road. He was there not by merit of his birth, but the merit of his deeds. He was sure that was what Brandon meant. He may have meant it as a jab at Josh, saying something of Josh's birth as well. Josh obviously took it that way from the look on his face. Yet he was silent. His outbursts became fewer since he had his finger cut, and nearly disappeared after their father died. Teddy Brown spoke. "There is news from the trade road. Reports of archers are coming. From what we know, they are shooting both sides." Josh scoffed. "Archers? The cowards who are too afraid to fight so they have to hide? This is unacceptable." "Yes, they bear the wyvern and griffin of the Middle Kingdom. They take more territory by the hour, but they do not move far beyond the trade road." Brandon raised his voice. "Withdraw all men immediately. Let them take the road." Jordan couldn't believe what he was hearing. A jolt went through his heart, a spark of anger. Josh reflected Jordan's feelings. "Let them take it? Do you hear yourself? Our father died protecting that territory." "Exactly, Josh!" Brandon snapped. His eyes burned, fixated on Josh. "He fought for that road, and now he's dead. If he didn't fight for it, he would still be alive." He couldn't believe it, but he was agreeing with Josh. How could Brandon disregard what their father had valued so much so to die for it? Their father still had to be avenged. His last battle couldn't be for nothing. He couldn't have spent his last breaths fighting for nothing. Besides, Wolfsfield lies to the south planning to attack us. We need to defend from the south as well. Let the Westerners deal with Mifflin. If we sacrifice a few dozen miles of land for more lives, who could complain about that? Eldon leaned forward. "It sets a bad precedent. If we give away miles today, it could be leagues tomorrow. Then, before we know what to do, we have an occupying force, or worse, knocking down our walls with siege equipment." "Thank you for your opinion, Uncle. Withdraw the men." And Brandon left without another word. Josh, Teddy Brown, Eldon, and Jordan sat in the long hall, speechless. No one said a word, but the tension was thick and heavy. Was the feeling anger, despair, or hopelessness? Jordan couldn't tell. Their lord had spoken. Eldon was the first to speak, softly and defeated. "We cannot disobey our lord, but that notion is ludicrous. We are being invaded, and he wants to give away our land?" Teddy Brown stood silently, stroking his mustache, staring at nothing. Josh looked angry, and so did Jordan. "We can't," insisted Josh. "We can't let these invaders attack us with impunity." "There must be a way to get him to see reason," said Eldon. "There isn't." Jordan softly interjected. "I can try to talk to him." "Fine then, go ahead," said Josh, looking anywhere but at Jordan. So Jordan chased after Brandon. His lord brother was in his room, sitting on his bed, sipping on bone broth. "Hi, Brandon. How are your ribs doing?" "Still sore, and I still haven't forgiven Joshua for breaking them. It hurts whenever I breathe, so I'm constantly reminded of what that hole did." Jordan's heart jumped. Brandon never said anything like that. Their father had, for sure, but Brandon wouldn't have been caught dead with a curse on his lips. "Every time I look at him, I want to smash his face. But he's my brother, after all. If he was anyone else, I would have him executed." Jordan never knew Brandon to speak so harshly. "Brandon, if we let these invaders take land, it could be easier for them to sack our towns. They could cut us off from trade." "I don't want to fight. I hate that we have to. But we have to." "Oh, this again? Don't let that idiot Josh put thoughts into your head. He's a violent pig. He would kill every single person in the hold if he thought he could." Josh wants our catacombs to be full 1,000 years too soon. If we make peace with the invaders, they can deal with Mifflin for us. I'm sure their intentions aren't evil. But Brandon, there's no reason to assume that. I'm Lord Brandon now, Sir Jordan. I know you didn't mean anything by it, but get into the habit. My lord, he knelt. I have yet to kill the demon. Your Lord Father gave his life because he believed defending our land was necessary, to ensure the safety of our people, our freedom and sovereignty. I know, and he's dead. I'm the Lord now, and I believe that he was wrong. That's why I'm going to live until I die of old age, and not by being cut in half. The disrespect in Brandon's voice was clear. Your lord has spoken. Let the Westerners handle Mifflin and the demon. I won't hear any more of this. But Lord Brandon, I said no. Stop now, before I get angry. I need to rest. Leave me. It was still morning, so Jordan was unsure why Brandon needed rest already. He had just woken up an hour or two ago. But then again, he was sure that lordship was exhausting, and he may have been missing sleep. Even so, trying to reason with him proved useless. He found his half-brother Josh and Eldon in one of the halls, whispering outside of Josh's quarters. Well, asked Josh, how did it go? Jordan reluctantly answered. He is insistent on withdrawing. I knew it. There is no reasoning with him. From the moment he gained power, he's used it to slap us all. Eldon, his father's brother in his green robes, stepped into the center of the hall. Jordan, Joshua and I have been talking. We do not believe the clans will like this declaration of withdrawal. Many will view it the way we do, as a surrender, and we worry for rebellion. We do not wish to ask anything of you, but we need someone to lead one final charge before word of this decree spreads, Josh said, leaning against the cold bricks of the wall. Jordan did not hesitate. I'll go. No, you can't go. That would be treason. Josh hesitated for half a second, and in that half second, Jordan thought he would hear the words, my brother, come from his half-brother's mouth. A skilled fighter. We can't afford to have you imprisoned or executed. We will send word if we can find a way. We wanted you to know. It wasn't what he expected to hear, but it was satisfying nonetheless. Josh had always complained that Jordan used cheap tactics when fighting, especially right after he lost. Hearing his half-brother admit to his skill was gratifying. It may be so, said Jordan, but I have business in Mifflin. He grasped the sword on his hip firmly. I'll meet these invaders, and they will let me through. Welcome to the Storytime Saturday podcast. I'm your host, TGD. This week we get... Is this the second point of view chapter for Jordan? This is only the second one. One of the best characters in the whole book, and he only has, 2 chapters. Shame. So let's go off with the writing aspect. Now, I actually have something to say. At the very beginning of the chapter, it just starts off that he fought the demon and won. So I'm not sure how I feel about not showing that fight. It's kind of a letdown that we're just sort of told, oh, that thing that we've been foreshadowing since the beginning of the book? Yeah, that happened. So that's not great. I wouldn't do something like this again. If something important happened, I would want to show it. I'm not sure how I feel about this sort of stuff. Because something like this, I remember something like this happened in Game of Thrones as well. With, what's the name of that one guy? Oh. The gay guy. Oh yeah, Loras Tyrell. Loras Tyrell, storms Dragonstone or something, and we just find out, oh yeah, he went to Dragonstone and fought, and he killed 10,000 people, and now he's about to die. Oh, so you mean this really cool character that we wanted to see more from? He just went and fought? That's awesome, great. We're just told that it happens. We don't get to see it. That's great. So I'm not sure. I don't think I would want to do something like that. I don't think I want to write like that again. So let's talk about the characters. Um, we get to see Jordan's perspective from this conflict between Josh and Brandon. We get to look into Jordan's mind and see that he's shocked to see some humanity in this renowned demon, and it unsettles him because he had this idea of what this monster was like, and then when he saw his face, he was shocked. Even though he's like a skilled fighter and has killed people before and looked into their eyes and killed them, the fact that it was so different from what he was expecting, like, really jars him. And in this chapter, Jordan finally gets what he always wanted. His goal was to become a knight and finally earn the right to belong. He even gets respect from Josh, but none of this sits right with him. He's unsettled by it all. He's like, it doesn't, I don't feel like I won. I have everything I wanted, but it doesn't feel right. Now, in this battle of ideas between Josh and Brandon, Jordan takes Josh's side. Even though the first time we, see Jordan's perspective, I think it was in Josh's chapter, Jordan said, I've been in more fights in the last week than I ever want to be in my entire life. And so that's sort of I don't know if that really drives Brandon to his conclusion, but it at least reinforces it. We actually see from Jordan's perspective, yeah, Brandon's not going down the right path. Honestly, Jordan is the most noble and morally upright character in this whole book, and that's really evident when he's talking to Brandon. So Brandon is like complaining about his ribs hurting and he's being mistreated by Josh, and which is kind of ironic because he's talking to Jordan about being mistreated by Josh. He's like, "You wouldn't understand, Jordan." So, if anyone understands what it's like to be mistreated by Josh, it's Jordan. Jordan has every reason to complain, to go off about how much he hates Josh. He has twice as many reasons as Brandon does to be complaining. And he doesn't. He's able to go and reason with Brandon and not lose his temper. When Josh tried to do that, he couldn't. He couldn't even bear to do it. He thought about reasoning with him, and he lost his temper immediately. Jordan goes in, and he's able to stay respectful the entire time. So let's talk about Brandon. There's different ways to view this. You can view it as he's really sticking up for himself now. Uncle Eldon's like, well, that's not a good idea. It's like, thanks for your opinion. Now withdraw the men. So some would say he's being a Chad. He's just saying it how it is. He goes, you know what? I'm in charge. I'm the boss, and you're gonna do what I say. Some would look at this and say, well, he's losing it. Now he's ignoring the counsel and advice of his advisors, and that's bad. So there's a few ways you could look at this. It's weird that at the beginning of the chapter, Brandon tells Jordan to take his sword and finish the job. It's weird that he says that if he's just going to order to retreat anyway. Although I guess that can be explained since the full retreat plan came only after the news of the Middle Kingdom advancing. We see that Brandon's anger with Josh has fermented into bitterness. And this is really where we see the character contrast, like I mentioned. Jordan has every reason to hate Josh, much more than Brandon does. And he doesn't, despite his mistreatment. Jordan still holds to his honor, even though he has every excuse not to. Which contrasts him against Brandon, who has half as many reasons to hate Josh, and still does, and is clinging on to his hatred of Josh, his bitterness against Josh. That's why Jordan's the best character in this book, even though I thought, when I first wrote this book, I thought, well, Jordan's kind of boring. He's a Boy Scout. But he actually stands out in all of these, like, morally gray, corrupt characters. Him being the only one that's moral makes him stand out, which I think is pretty great. Now, let's just sort of lump all these other characters together. We could talk about them. So the others, like Eldon, and he's referred to as Eldon. He doesn't refer to him as Uncle Eldon. We see that Jordan's perspective, he's only ever called Eldon. So Eldon and Teddy Brown agree with Josh, and they figure that everyone else in Larksvale will agree as well. This was foreshadowed from the very beginning of the book. Regardless of, the reader's opinion on whether the reader thinks they should retreat or advance or fight or not, we've been told since the very beginning that their honor is their shield. That it's a disgrace to back down from a fight. That's their whole culture. Their whole culture is that it's a disgrace. If you're backing away from a fight, you're a coward. You're a disgrace. And that's Brandon's gonna grate against the entire culture to do what he wants. Now, let's take some notes here. A few notes. When Jordan is looking at the sword and he's like, "There's an evil to it. The blood inside the steel is crying out." That's just metaphorical. Like, that's his own thoughts on it. Like, that's how he's viewing it. It's not magical. The sword isn't magical at all. As a matter of fact, I think the most magical thing we've seen in the entire book is Randall Cloud, who's like this superhuman, super strong guy who's wielding this giant sword. But other than that, it's been very low fantasy, no magic. Even things that seem mystical, like this demon, we learn that, yeah, he's just a guy. And when this steam is rolling from his mouth, it's just because it's cold out. So, yeah, not much magic, if any, at all, in this book. Now, what this demon wields is called a bardiche, and you might want to look that up. It's like this really long axe. The top comes off and it comes to a point. So this is like a big hunk of steel. I looked, and these things are like 4 to 5 pounds of steel. And this isn't something that's usually taken into account, the actual reforging process. In, like, Lord of the Rings, how they reforge Anduril, reforge Narsil into Anduril. That's not how that works. That's not how you reforge something. I think when, in Game of Thrones, when ice is reforged into Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail, that's not really how that works either. You lose loads of material when you're working like just from a solid ingot. When you shape it to the right proportions, you cut pieces off. When you're profiling it, like grinding it to get the correct shape, you lose loads of material. If you watch, there was this YouTube show called Man at Arms, and I think those same guys are doing something else on their own channel now. He'll talk about, like, he'll be putting a fuller on something, and a fuller is just they call it a blood groove, even though that's not really what it is. It makes the sword more rigid and lighter. He'll be doing that, and he'll do that for like 5 hours and say, "Yeah, I've ground about 2 pounds off of this sword, putting this fuller in." And that's not really something that's taken into account, that you end up losing a lot of material. So in this, with this bardiche that's like 5 pounds of steel, that being reworked into a 2.5, 3 pound sword is completely feasible. That's just a bit of a rant, though. That's not really super relevant. But that's it. That's all we have to. All I really have to say about this week. Now, next week we get to see another chapter from Lord Commander Fari. I wonder what he's doing. Yeah, he was just ordered to go in and conquer the trade road. Well, he's not conquering the trade road. He's like guarding the trade road or whatever. And we'll see how that works next week. But that's been the Storytime Saturday podcast. Thanks for being here. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube, you like and subscribe. Watching anywhere else, make sure you like and follow wherever you may be watching. I'll see you next Saturday on the Storytime Saturday podcast.